Hey everyone, welcome to lesson 11 of theme 2 GCSE geography. We haven't got long to go now until the end of the theme, so we're going to move on to the concept today of globalization. So we're going to construct the meaning of the term, we're going to summarize the driving forces behind the concept, and then we're going to evaluate the impact of globalization. So pause the video here a moment, go ahead and write down today's title, and we'll get going. Okay, so the first thing I'd like us to do is take a look at these images on the next slide and think about this quote. The world is now a global village. Marshall McLuhan started saying this in the 1960s, but what do you think he actually means by this phrase? Just have a think for a moment. Think about the fact he's got the word global, which means the whole world, right next to the word village. And when we think of a village, we think much smaller scale. The world is becoming a smaller and smaller place. Metaphorically, the planet isn't shrinking, okay, just to clarify, but metaphorically it's becoming a smaller and smaller place. And it's because of this idea of globalization that we're going to dig deeper into. What I'd like you to do is just take a moment and see how many of these logos you can name. Not a single one is a British company, but I bet you can name pretty much all of them. Give it a try. Okay, so if we work from the top left, we've got McDonald's. Oh, my voice recognition on my phone. Yeah, so it's the Canadian symbol for McDonald's. We've got Starbucks, we've got Coca-Cola, Adidas, Gap, Nike, Nestle, Burger King, Ford, which used to be an American company, LG, and Hyundai. I bet you could name pretty much all of those, and yet not a single one of them is a British company. And this is globalization at play. This is our world becoming a smaller and smaller place. So what is globalization? It's, if you were in school, we'd discuss it with each other, but really it's the increasing interconnectivity between people, places, countries, and that interconnectivity, those connections are established more through we trade more easily with each other than ever before. We're affected by each other's politics to a greater extent than ever before. We share culture, we share food, and the way that we share these things is usually through technology. So cultural exchanges through YouTube and things like that, learning about other people's cultures, and through transport. Obviously, air travel has become more easily accessible. Travel over the seas has become far quicker. So sharing of everything around the world has become far quicker and far easier. That is globalization. It's the increasing connections between places and people across our planet. It's driven by technology and transport. And what it creates is the concept of global cities. A global city is a city that is connected with other cities around the world on a global scale through lots of different ways. Swansea does have international connections with other countries, but not enough to really class it as a global city. An example of a global city would be somewhere like Cardiff or London, the much more major cities. What I'd like you to do here a moment is pause the video and go ahead and write down those two definitions, please. Okay. So let's dig a little bit deeper into what globalization actually is. So advances in technology are making the world far smaller, in inverted commas. You can talk over Zoom now to somebody in Australia, the other side of the world, at the touch of a button. And what it means is that it's accelerating our progress, and this process is getting faster and faster. We're making huge leaps forward in terms of our developments in technology, in trade, in governance. These changes are often driven by multinational companies. So those big companies that you were just looking at, Coca-Cola, Starbucks, when they want to sell to a wider global market, they look at ways to trade more easily, communicate more easily, share ideas more easily. And it's those things that are driving this increasing interconnectivity. So if we look at it in terms of an actual timeline, excuse me. So if we go back to the start of when globalization started to become a thing after World War II in the late 40s, we had a lot of immigration from other countries around the world, from what we call our British colonies. So Britain used to, in inverted commas, control a lot of other countries around the world. India, for example, Jamaica as well. And so after the war, there was a lot of rebuilding and regenerating going on in Britain that people could come to Britain and take advantage of. There were lots of jobs being created. We were coming out of the recession following World War II. Britain was recovering and people were coming in to take advantage of that and join in with our recovery and get those jobs and make the most of that opportunity to earn more money. You might have heard in the news talk about the Windrush generation. Those are the people that came in from Jamaica around about that time after World War II. And we also established more global ways of running our economies, things like the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, and the World Bank as well. So we started to share our economies more easily. Our economies started to become more interlinked, and our cultures started to become more interlinked as well. Following on from that, into the 1990s, the spread of home computers. The phones you hold in your hands now are so vastly, that's terrible grammar, so much more powerful than the computers that we had in our homes in the early 1990s. But this was the start of home computers. And following on from that, then all these home computers across the world became much more connected through broadband. Now, you lot won't remember dial-up, but the original internet, you couldn't be on the home phone and the internet at the same time. It would take even minutes to load Google, and there'd be this ear-piercing, screechy, kind of Morse codey type sound when you're trying to join the internet. Wi-Fi was not a thing. 4G, 5G, 3G, not even invented yet. But we're starting to become more interconnected, more readily in homes across the world. We then start getting the rise of MNCs, multinational companies. So Tesco, for example, in the late 90s, starts to open stores in Asia. You'll be driving through Thailand and you'll see a Tesco Lotus, which is the Southeast Asian branches of Tesco. However, there is a downside. We're sharing money more readily, culture more readily, ideas and media more readily. But that does mean that it creates racial tension sometimes and friction. So there has been a rise in terrorist attacks as globalization has become more prevalent, as we've become more interconnected. For example, the 9/11 terrorist attacks on the Twin Towers in America. Facebook kicks off in 2004. Now, Facebook wasn't the first social media site. Before that, there was MySpace, there was Bebo. But Facebook was the real pivotal change in how much we use online social media. You should watch on Netflix. There's a documentary called The Social Dilemma, I think it is. And it tells you just how online providers like Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, how they gather data on us and how they monitor us and how they actually manipulate us to stay online longer. Anyway, I digress, but it's very interesting. You should watch it. But Facebook makes everyone so easily connected across the globe. And all of this interconnection means we start to have a shift in who has the most money, who has the most power. China overtakes Japan as the world's second largest economy. Those Southeast Asian areas are growing very rapidly in terms of their economy. They've got an emerging industrial sector. More jobs, more money in that industry means an emerging middle class with lots of money and lots of power. So we have a movement now of some LICs like China and India moving towards becoming NICs, newly industrialized countries, and they start to become more interconnected with other countries as well, and this further drives global connections. You don't need to write this down, but if you wanted to pause here and make a copy of this, then by all means do so. But in summary, what you can see happening is it's technology that's driving globalization. Computers, internet, it's also multinational companies that's driving globalization, like Tesco, like Coca-Cola, like Starbucks. And finally, what's not mentioned so much here is transport. We can now fly from country to country so much more easier so much more easily than ever before. So really it comes down to transport, technology and multinational companies are meaning that we are now more interconnected than ever before. So in what ways are we actually connected? Global cities, Mumbai, London, Cardiff. What do we share and how do we share it? So we're going to use London as an example. I didn't mean to go backwards then. So first off, we share people. People move from place to place, and when people arrive in a different place, they share culture. So global cities like London, they attract migrants from all over the world for economic reasons, jobs, and jobs means money. And as more people come into these global cities, that increases cultural diversity. If you look at London as an example, there's actually over 100 different languages spoken across London. The cultural diversity is massive, and on the whole, this can be a really good thing. You share your music, you share your cuisine, you share your ideas and your festivals, and it should be a really positive thing. So we share people, migration and culture. We also share money. So you've now got much more extensive banking systems, and global cities are the financial centres for that global banking network. The word commodity, by the way, is something of value. So it could be stocks and shares, it could be certain products that have been produced by a country. Okay, so finance and trade. So we share people and we share money. The way that we do a lot of that is through transport, by air, by rail, by road. From Heathrow alone, nearly 1,500 flights take off and land every single day. We also share ideas and information more readily than ever before. We not only now have newspapers, TV and radio, but of course you've got your online information sharing networks. And that is running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. The media does not rest. And finally, we share our decisions. So the rise in multinational companies, Tata Steel, for example, it's an Indian company. Its headquarters are in Mumbai. But obviously we've got Tata Steel factories in Port Talbot down the road and in Trostre, even closer to home. So if one of the bosses of Tata makes a decision in Mumbai, it will affect the 3,000 people that work in the Tata Steel industry right on our doorstep. So increasing interconnectivity means that decisions made in one part of the world affect people in many other parts of the world. That's what governance is. Who governs? Who makes decisions? Who makes the rules? What I'd like you to do is put down a subheading, Global Cities, How Are They Connected? And I'd like you to make 5 bullet points, one for each of these, summarising what we share and how we share it. So this one, for example, you could summarise this down to migration and culture, would be your bullet point, and then put just like a dash. Global cities equals more jobs, equals more opportunities, equals attracts more people. Finance and trade, second bullet point, dash. Global cities are home to the larger banks, and these share commodities and money between them across a global market. Yeah. Transport hubs. Air travel, rail travel and road travel is easier than ever before. Yeah. So put 5 bullet points, 5 summaries. What do we share and how do we share it? Pause the video here a moment and do that, please. Okay, so finally, let's actually evaluate whether this globalization malarkey is a good or a bad thing. It sounds pretty positive so far. We have lots of different food now that we can enjoy from all around the world, right on the doorstep in the takeaways that we can order from through an app on our phone. We now have lots of different music genres. We can trade products more easily, so we've got a wider variety of choice. We have easier access to social media and news, so we can be more aware. We can access other areas of the world literally by the next day. You can get all the way across to Australia on holiday. So far, this seems like a really positive thing, but of course, when the world becomes more interconnected, there's bound to be a downside to everyone being able to access things so easily. So what do we think are the advantages and disadvantages of globalization? If you take a look at this image for a moment, what message do you think it's trying to get across? What can you infer from it? So we've got two different sides, it seems, when you look at this image. On the left-hand side here, there's clearly these people have been drawn to look. Straight black hair, they're on a sandy, potentially island, palm trees. This has been drawn quite deliberately to look like it might be Southeast Asian tropical islands, perhaps. Somewhere like Vietnam, for example. You've then got what appears to be a very powerful side here. Shell, Texaco, Coca-Cola, Microsoft, Motorola, all of these multinational companies, Nike, McDonald's. And what's happening is everything that's being brought over by the multinational companies is then clearly controlling and taking over what once was, they're sort of taking control here and ownership of what once belonged to somebody else by using technology, by using we've got more money, and therefore that means more power. So really what's happening with globalization, if we're not careful, is we're all going to end up the same. We're all going to end up watching the same videos on YouTube, wearing the same brands of clothes, celebrating the same festivals and same holidays. So it dilutes culture if we're not careful, rather than raising awareness of it. It can mean that countries that are, in inverted commas, less powerful could end up losing out in trade deals because they get overpowered by the multinational companies with the headquarters in the rich areas. So what I'd like you to do, there's a handout underneath this PowerPoint that has lots of different statements in it. And what I'd like you to do is choose two colours and colour code each of the statements. Just to make you aware, I think there might be a typo on one of the top middle boxes. Actually, now that I've remembered it, I'll probably change it before I upload it. But if I forget, it might say LEDC instead of LIC. That's the old terminology. We used to say less economically developed country. Now we say low income country. So if you see LEDC, don't worry about it. That we use the phrase LIC now, but I'll try and remember to change it before I upload this. I'd like you to colour code the statements. If you think the statement is talking about a positive impact of globalisation, for example, sharing of cultural cuisine and music enriches cultures within countries, that'd be positive. So highlight or colour it in one colour. On the other hand, there might be a statement that says something about ethnic minorities establishing communities within existing cities can create racial tension with the people already living there because they feel that people are coming in and taking over. And that racial tension sometimes can cause gang wars and things like that. Then you'd colour that in your negative colour. Any two colours you like, create a key, colour code your statements. If you don't have a printer, open up the document and maybe write the statements into two different columns or write them down in your book and colour code them somehow. But I'd like you to go ahead and evaluate the impact of globalisation. Pick out the good impacts, the negative impacts. Pause the video here and go do that, please. Okay, so as you can see, globalisation is a bit of a double-edged sword. There's lots of positive impacts to the things that we share and how easily we can share them. But if we're not careful, are we going to lose our identity? Is it going to create more harm than good? Is it going to create more racial tension, leading to more segregation and more social issues? So it's a bit of a difficult one to manage, actually. And what I'd like you to think about as a closing thought is, how global are you? So where were your parents born? Have a little look at the labels inside your clothes. Where were they made? What music do you mostly listen to? And your favourite artists. Are they British? Are they American? Are you into your K-pop from Korea? The films that you watch, the TV series that you're into. I bet a lot of them weren't produced in Britain. Where do your parents work? And what companies do they work for? Are they multinational companies? Are they British companies? Obviously, we're in the middle of COVID, so I don't want to rub salt in the wound, but what's the last holiday you went on? Where did you go? How easily did you get there, thanks to advancements in travel? And finally, your sports and hobbies. A lot of the sports we play now in Britain didn't originate in Britain. So just have a little think. When it comes to globalisation, how globally connected we are, quite often we're more affected by it than we think. And that's the end of lesson 11. So well done. We've got about, I reckon, 3 or 4 more lessons to go before we reach the end of theme 2. So I'll see you soon for lesson 12. As usual, if you have any issues, drop me an email, gleasona@hubcymru.net, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can.